I think all anybody wants is for you to say, okay, we can have an alt season. There was somebody I saw on Twitter who said that like the way that you've called this right for so long has just totally blown his mind. Okay, I want to kind of like pull some of these things together here. So you're calling for a defensive rotation. You're calling for Bitcoin dominance to go higher as Bitcoin USD goes higher. Then you're saying following that, you're expecting Ethereum to build to a new all-time high. You've also said that you expect all this to happen in Q4. We're waiting into Q4 here. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of time for this to happen, for one of these confirmations to come one way or the other. What is your time frame on expecting this to play out? Like, is this like by the end of this month? Is it by end of December? Like, or are you kind of agnostic on that? Like, what kind of time frame are you expecting on all of this?
Well, as I've said for years, in the 2017 cycle, all Bitcoin pairs hit this wick right here in early November, right? They went to 0.25 in early November, which is still 3 weeks from now. And still, they rallied to 1.34 in the matter of month, like in the matter of a couple of months. The alt season, when it happens so quickly that you don't even really have time to think about it, right? Like, it's not what people remember from 2021, where alts like rally against Bitcoin and they keep rallying against Bitcoin for months and months and months and months. That was a special case where we had all this money printing and interest rates were at zero, and it kind of allowed for a longer alt season back then. But if you were around in 2017, like, Bitcoin was the main thing to hold, except for very small times during the cycle. But again, you can have a big rally by alt Bitcoin pairs that starts in early November. In fact, if you look at the last 2 years, when did these rallies occur, right? The rally that started, that ended there and there. So the first rally that ended here in December 2023, it started in early December, but the first low was like early November, right? So early November and early December. Look at 2017. It was early November, and then this wick was early December. Look at last year. When did the rally start? It happened in early November. So my time frame on this stuff is, if you're going to see alts start to rally against Bitcoin, it's probably going to start in early November, but you could still have another wick down as late as early December, right? So you could have a wick down to, 0.27 for alt Bitcoin pairs, even 6 weeks from now, and you could still end up getting an alt season, as you can see in the last cycle. I think Bitcoin will top out in Q4. There's always a chance that the altcoin market goes a little bit higher into early 2026, like January, like early to mid-January, because that's actually what happened in the 2017-2018 cycle, is that alt Bitcoin pairs actually topped like that first week of January, right? So that's kind of how I would look at this. It's a timing thing. But here's the thing. If it's early November, if it's 3 weeks from now, or especially early December, and Bitcoin is still not at an all-time high, then you're not going to get an alt season, right? Like, that's just, there's no way to say it in a way that could be, consoling to someone, right? The only way you're going to get it is if Bitcoin gets another rally to all-time highs. And I think that's a tough pill to swallow. So again, if people want an alt season, we have to see Bitcoin go to all-time highs first.
Why do people invest in real estate? Because it spits off cash flow. But I'm not here to manage rental properties. That's why I'm looking at Figure Markets. Their new democratized prime product backs your money with real cash flowing assets and returns up to 9% APY. It's the first real world asset borrow lend pool built for everyone, not just institutions. Ready to lend like a bank and get more than the 5% Aave is offering you? Download the Figure Markets app today and get 9% on your idle funds. Go to milkroad.com/Figure Markets. Did you know you can earn Bitcoin without ever buying it? That's where the Gemini credit card comes in. Here's how it works. Earn up to 4% back in Bitcoin on gas, transit, and rideshare, 3% on dining, 2% on groceries, and 1% on everything else. Use it just like any other credit card. And you're building a crypto portfolio at the same time. The best part, the Gemini credit card has no annual fee and works anywhere MasterCard is accepted. When you're approved and spend $3,000 in the first 90 days, you'll get a $200 Bitcoin bonus. Spend as usual, earn Bitcoin instead at milkroad.com/Gemini.
Okay, that's helpful framing. I just I wanted to hear you kind of spell that out for us, so I kind of have an idea of what dates to watch for and what might happen here in Q4. One of your catchphrases that you've popularized is that narrative follows price. And just so our audience understands what I understand this to mean is that whatever the price action is, people will find something in the headlines or some sort of narrative to sort of like backwards rationalize, oh, that's why the price did that. You've said you don't believe this is the case and that the price is really what is creating these narratives. This kind of begs the question to me, what in your mind are digital asset prices following? Is it just private market cycles? Is it global liquidity? What are these prices actually following if it's not narrative, if it's not sentiment, what is it in your mind? What do you think it's following?
For whatever reason, there's this like cyclical behavior with humanity, right? With humans. And a lot of people chalk up Bitcoin's 4-year cycle that we can observe, like all the major lows are about 4 years apart. They chalk it up to the halving. But the reality is the 4-year cycle has existed long before Bitcoin has been around. I don't know exactly what it follows. There's evidence to suggest that it follows the liquidity cycles, which I could somewhat get on board with. There's also evidence to suggest it follows the presidential cycles. You know, when a president gets elected, in that first year after the election, markets typically do well, but then the year after, the midterm year, they don't do as well. And maybe it's because whoever's in power, that's like the best year to allow for the markets to reset, because you don't have to worry about you getting reelected because it's the midterm year, right? You still have a couple more years after that. So you don't have to worry. And it also, if the markets drop in the midterm year, it then allows the markets to build up in the pre-election year and the election year to make the incumbent look good. So it's like, that's the year to let the markets drop if you're going to let them drop. If the markets drop the minute a new president takes office, that also doesn't really look that great. And that has happened before. It happened a lot in the 1970s. But if you look at Bitcoin first, you'll notice that all these major lows are about 4 years apart, right? You have, right here, 2014, 2018, and 2022, plus or minus a month, right? But they're approximately, 4 years apart. This is not unique to Bitcoin. Look at the S&P 500. So if you look, let's change this to a monthly time frame. If you look at the S&P 500 and you go back to like the 1960s and 1970s, these major lows are all 4 years apart, right? You have 1982, you have 1978, 1974, 1970, 1966, 1962, right? 1958. They're all 4 years apart, right? Like they're all.
I'm noticing a pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, eventually something changes, right? Eventually something changes and you might have a low that doesn't occur when it normally does, because we didn't get a low in 1986. We ended up getting it in 1987. So at some point in the future, for Bitcoin, the 4-year cycle will break. Like it will, because it's not like, I don't think we can sit here and say that for the next 100 years, it's always going to play out the exact same way. At some point, there will be an economic crisis, like with a pandemic, but with a pandemic, we just kind of printed our problems away immediately. At some point, there's going to be a crisis where the 4-year cycle will break. But my argument is why, I would say, if it's not broken yet, let's not try to fix it. In the 1960s, in the 1950s, all the way out until the early 1980s, you would have just been better off assuming this time was not different, right? You would have just been better off assuming it's not different. And eventually, you would have, in 1986, you would have been like, okay, there's going to be a bear market. And then you would have been wrong. But then a year later, it still ended up dropping below that level anyways. So I think the argument here for me is that the 4-year cycle exists outside of Bitcoin, because you can see it in the charts. At some point, it will likely break. But until that point happens, why not just trade what continues to play out? And then that way, you don't get wrecked for years and years and years and years, only to finally be proven right after like 2 decades, right? You can just say, all right, I'm going to have a plan. But that doesn't mean you go sell all your Bitcoin at the end of every post-halving year either. I never do that. Because I also recognize that there's always a chance that this is the cycle that it breaks. So what I always say in the midterm years is get rid of your altcoins, right? Get rid of all your altcoins, and whatever you want to sell in a parabolic rally by Bitcoin in Q4 the post-halving year, you can sell, but then keep the hodl stack in case we're wrong, right? In case 4-year cycle breaks. Because if you're wrong, you're going to want to be holding something, and Bitcoin leads the bull market, right? So dominance would probably go higher. So it makes sense to hold some Bitcoin. If you're right about it being a bear market, then at least you're holding the thing that will drop a lot less than everything else in crypto, right? Like if Bitcoin drops 70% next year, the altcoin market's going to get annihilated, you know? So, and also Bitcoin will be like one of the first things to return to all-time highs in the next cycle. So that's how I think you navigate it. I think you say, you know what? Let's assume this time's not different. Let's assume it's going to play out like it always has. That means Bitcoin tops in Q4 the post-halving year. And that means that it makes sense to get completely out of the altcoin market in, no later than mid-January of 2026. As far as what drives the 4-year cycle, it might be liquidity. It could be the presidential election cycle. I don't really think it's the halving, because you can see the 4-year cycle exists before Bitcoin. Maybe it's just human emotions. I don't really know. But I will say narrative does not lead the price. And there's really great examples of that. Think back to Ethereum. I mean, you asked me about Ethereum, right? You know how this year it feels like the narrative has changed for it, like ever since April when it went to its regression band. It feels like everything changed, and like all of a sudden it has the power, to go to these new all-time highs. But remember, it didn't have that ability until it went to its regression band that it always returns to before it goes to all-time highs. So if you remember back in 2024, when we had the ETF for Ethereum, right, the spot ETF launched, everyone back then told me why I was going to be wrong about the ETH Bitcoin continued devaluation because of the Ethereum ETF. But Ethereum topped on the ETF release, right? And then it just dropped for basically the next year. That's a great example of a narrative that had price continued to go up when the ETF was launched, everyone would have chalked it up to the ETF launching, just like that's what happened with Bitcoin. But because price did not continue to go up, that narrative quickly died and no one talked about it anymore because the price wasn't going up. So again, the price leads the narrative, not the other way around. And because the price of Ethereum started going down after the ETF instead of up, then people started talking more about monetary policy and why we need lower interest rates to allow this stuff to go up. But beforehand, they didn't care about that. It was all about, oh, it's an ETF, therefore the price is going to go up.
Want insights on what's moving crypto markets and how we're trading each event? Subscribe to our channel and join the Milk Road Daily and Pro newsletters and start investing like the top 1%. This show is for educational purposes only. Nothing we say is financial advice. Investing is risky. Never invest more than you can afford to lose.